The sun blazed down over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the marble steps of the Supreme Court. Inside, the air was electric, a quiet hum of anticipation blanketed the massive courtroom as reporters shuffled their notes and cameramen adjusted their tripods. Everyone had their eyes on one woman, Pam Bondi, the newly appointed United States Attorney General, standing with steely resolve just beyond the security barrier. Pam was no stranger to controversy or pressure. As a former Florida Attorney General and a fierce advocate under President Donald Trump's administration, she had made waves with her unapologetic style, her sharp legal mind, and her talent for uncovering corruption in the places most people were too afraid to look. But today was different. Today wasn't about prosecuting a white-collar criminal or putting a corrupt politician on notice. Today's target was one of the most powerful men in the judiciary, Federal Judge Alton Merrick, a man lauded in the media as the iron gavel for his tough-on-crime stance and no-nonsense demeanor in court. To the public, he was a paragon of justice. But Pam had seen something the rest of the world hadn't. For months, whispers had trickled into her office, quiet allegations of bribery, unusual case dismissals, and a trail of dark money that seemed to vanish into thin air. At first, she thought it was smoke with no fire. After all, who dared challenge a federal judge? But then came the Seabrook case, a controversial civil suit involving a class-action lawsuit against a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor. Judge Merrick had mysteriously thrown out the case without explanation, claiming lack of evidence despite overwhelming proof. That's when Pam's instincts screamed. She formed a covert task force within the Justice Department, working with ethical watchdog groups, forensic accountants, and even a few brave insiders willing to break silence. What they found was explosive, a sprawling web of corruption linking Judge Merrick to payoffs, offshore accounts, and quid pro quo rulings. Still, none of it would matter unless she could bring the evidence to light in open court. So here she was, standing in a courtroom packed with reporters and DC's legal elite, about to argue a motion that could shake the very foundation of the judicial system. Her plan was risky. Merrick had been assigned to preside over a key pretrial hearing. Pam's team had maneuvered it so she could personally attend, armed with a sealed brief of classified evidence. The trap had been set, and the walls were closing in. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open and Judge Merrick strode in. He was tall, commanding, with silver hair slicked back like a news anchor. He adjusted his robe as he took the bench and scanned the courtroom with calculated boredom. "Let's proceed," he said, voice cold and crisp. Pam rose to her feet, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Your Honor, I would like to submit to the court a sealed exhibit for review, evidence that pertains not only to the matter at hand but also to the integrity of these proceedings," she said. Merrick narrowed his eyes. "What evidence?" Pam walked forward, lifting a black folder from her briefcase. She handed it to the bailiff, who placed it on the bench before the judge. Merrick opened the folder, eyes scanning the contents. For a second, something in his expression twitched, almost imperceptibly, but Pam saw it. He flipped another page. Then another. His fingers faltered. "You will explain this immediately," he barked. Pam's voice was calm and resolute. "Your Honor, the contents of that folder contain documentation from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, offshore transaction records, witness testimonies, and internal DOJ communications. We believe you have accepted bribes in excess of $5 million in exchange for favorable rulings, including in the Seabrook case." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. One reporter dropped his pen. Merrick's face went pale. "This is outrageous." "No, this is justice," Pam interrupted. "And under federal statute, I am invoking emergency authority granted to the U.S. Attorney General to request an immediate judicial ethics review and criminal detainment." "Security!" Merrick shouted, rising to his feet. But the bailiff didn't move. Instead, 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward from the back of the room. One of them opened his jacket, revealing a sealed federal warrant. "Judge Alton Merrick," the lead marshal announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial power." The room erupted. Merrick stumbled back, disbelief in his eyes. "You can't do this." Pam leaned in, voice low and icy. "You thought your robe made you untouchable. But no one is above the law, not even you." The marshals moved swiftly. In seconds, the judge's hands were pulled behind his back. The clink of handcuffs echoed off the marble walls like a death knell. Pam stood tall, unfazed by the frenzy around her. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters yelled questions. But she just turned, walking out of the courtroom with quiet dignity. The storm had broken. And this was only the beginning. The image of Judge Alton Merrick being led out of the courtroom in cuffs sent a political tremor through Washington, D.C. that could be felt from K Street to Capitol Hill. News channels went into full-blown emergency coverage. Headlines screamed across the nation. Federal judge arrested in open court, AG Pam Bondi leads takedown. Judiciary shaken by corruption allegations. Trump's attorney general launches legal earthquake. Within the hour, every network, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, was cutting to panels of legal analysts, pundits, and stunned commentators. While the left and right bickered over what it all meant, one thing was crystal clear. Pam Bondi had done something unprecedented. At the Justice Department, the atmosphere was chaotic but buzzing with triumph. Bondi's inner circle, a small team of hand-picked prosecutors and investigators, worked in sync, knowing the next 72 hours would be crucial. The public might have been shocked, but the evidence was airtight. They'd planned every move with precision, timing the arrest to catch the judge before he could destroy key evidence or flee the country. Pam stood in front of a press podium later that afternoon, facing a swarm of reporters in the Justice Department's press briefing room. Her voice was steady, her tone unapologetic. Today's events were not taken lightly, but when an individual who has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution abuses that power for personal gain, we have a duty, a moral obligation to act. No judge, no matter how powerful, is above the law. A reporter from the Washington Post raised a hand. Attorney General Bondi, did the president authorize this arrest? She didn't flinch. The Department of Justice operates independently. I briefed the president as a courtesy, but this investigation and its conclusion were my responsibility. President Trump made it clear. Hold everyone accountable, regardless of rank, robe, or reputation. Another reporter fired a question. Is this the beginning of a larger investigation into judicial corruption? Pam looked him dead in the eye. I think you already know the answer to that. Behind the scenes, Judge Merrick had been taken to a secure federal holding facility. The evidence against him had been laid out in meticulous detail. There were wire transfers traced to shell companies in the Caymans, encrypted emails between the judge and corporate lobbyists, and, perhaps most damning, audio recordings from his private chambers. In one clip, Merrick could be heard saying, "If they want that case thrown out, they know what it costs. Wire it by Friday." It was enough to chill the blood of even the most jaded political operatives. But the real shock was yet to come. Within 24 hours of Merrick's arrest, a sealed document surfaced in the DOJ database. It was a list codenamed Project Argus, compiled by Bondi's team. On it were the names of 7 other federal judges under quiet investigation, suspected of similar corruption patterns. Merrick was the first domino. Pam was methodical. She didn't want this to become a partisan bloodbath. Her mission wasn't to target liberal or conservative judges. It was to purge the rot, regardless of affiliation. And she was prepared to go all the way. That night, in the West Wing, Pam met privately with President Trump. The president, uncharacteristically quiet, stood by the resolute desk and studied her carefully. "You sure about this, Pam?" he asked. "This is going to shake the system, maybe even burn it down." Pam didn't hesitate. "Mr. President, the system's already on fire. I'm just making sure the arsonists don't walk away." Trump gave a slow nod, the corners of his mouth twitching into something between a smirk and a grimace. "Good. Just make sure you win." By morning, Washington was boiling over with speculation. The judiciary demanded emergency meetings. Legal societies scrambled to distance themselves from Merrick. Civil rights organizations and even libertarian groups issued statements either praising Bondi's boldness or warning about the precedent it set. And while the political machine spun wildly, Pam was already moving forward. Back at her office, she stood before a corkboard covered in photos, documents, and red string. It looked like something out of a spy thriller, but this was no fiction. Each node represented another powerful figure, another case waiting to be cracked. Merrick had opened the door, but behind it was a hallway full of locked chambers. Pam Bondi had the keys, and she wasn't stopping now. The morning after Merrick's arrest, the halls of the U.S. District Court were emptier than usual. Judges who once strutted the marble corridors with entitlement now avoided eye contact with reporters stationed outside. Chambers were quiet. Office doors were shut tighter. Whispers replaced conversations. Pam Bondi had cracked the mask and now the power brokers were scrambling behind it. Her office was flooded with encrypted tips. Young clerks, mid-level attorneys, even a retired appellate judge began to come forward. One email stood out, a former staffer from Judge Merrick's court offering full cooperation in exchange for federal protection. Pam met with him in a secure conference room beneath the DOJ's main building. The man's name was Ethan Colby, a sharp, anxious 32-year-old with bags under his eyes and fingers that trembled when he signed his confidentiality waiver. "I never thought it would go this far," he said, glancing around nervously. But Merrick wasn't the only one. There's a whole system. Quiet deals. Backroom decisions. They don't call it bribery, they use euphemisms, consultation fees, honorariums, speaking engagements that never happen. Pam leaned forward. "Who else is involved?" Ethan hesitated, then slid a flash drive across the table. "Start with these files. There's metadata, internal memos. You'll see a pattern." The flash drive would prove to be dynamite. It showed cross-communication between multiple judges in the Northeastern Judicial Circle, a loosely coordinated network of federal appointees who had, over the past decade, allegedly taken money or favors in exchange for favorable rulings in corporate litigation, real estate seizures, and even sentencing leniency in white-collar crime. The money trail led not just to offshore accounts, but to political PACs, law firm kickbacks, and one particularly influential figure on Capitol Hill. Senator Bradley Vance, chair of the Judiciary Oversight Committee. Pam's jaw clenched when she saw his name. Vance had always postured as a clean-cut law and order conservative, the kind who quoted the Constitution and smiled for the Sunday talk shows. But the financial records showed his campaign had received donations suspiciously aligned with judicial rulings presided over by judges now under Pam's microscope. Worse yet, Vance had personally nominated Merrick for a circuit promotion 2 years ago, a nomination that stalled after internal whispers flagged ethics concerns. It was all connecting. Pam called her lead prosecutor, a no-nonsense Navy veteran named Kira Monroe, into her office. "We've got something deeper than a dirty judge here," Pam said, dropping the files on the desk. "This is systemic." Monroe flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing. "Looks like a judicial cartel." Pam nodded. "And they've been hiding in plain sight." But as she prepared to escalate the investigation, threats began to trickle in. It started small, a black SUV idling too long outside her home in Virginia. Then a dead phone line in her DOJ office. A glitch that temporarily wiped a month's worth of encrypted communications. But the message was clear, she was hitting a nerve. Despite the heat, Pam pressed forward. She called a private meeting with her internal team, no more than 6 people, and laid it all out. "Listen," she told them, "they're going to fight back. There are judges, senators, maybe even DOJ insiders tied into this. We need airtight evidence before we go public." Kira asked, "What's the plan?" "We flip one of the other judges," Pam replied. "Hard and fast. Get a confession or a plea bargain. Once we get one to talk, the rest start falling like dominoes." It didn't take long. Judge Helena Arnett, a respected jurist out of Philadelphia, found herself cornered after forensic accountants traced a $400,000 transfer to her son's startup that never launched. When confronted with the documents and the potential for federal prison time, Arnett cracked. "I didn't want to do it," she sobbed in the interview room. "They pressured me. Told me my career would be over if I didn't play along." "Who pressured you?" Pam asked. Arnett looked up with hollow eyes. "Vance. It always came from Vance." Pam sat back in her chair, pulse pounding. A sitting U.S. senator was now implicated directly. But what rattled Pam most was what Arnett said next. They call themselves the Silent Syndicate. Not an official group. Just a circle. They pick cases, pick judges. They keep things balanced, or so they think. But it's just power. Control. And once you're in, there's no getting out. The dam had broken. Pam's case had gone from high stakes to historic. The DOJ was no longer just going after corrupt judges, they were preparing to bring down a judicial crime network that had embedded itself within the very structure of American law. The pressure was building. And Pam Bondi had just lit the fuse. Within 48 hours of Judge Helena Arnett's confession, the Justice Department was in full lockdown mode. Top-level briefings were occurring in secured, windowless rooms, phones confiscated, notepads forbidden. What had started as an unprecedented arrest was now threatening to become the most significant legal scandal in U.S. history. The target list grew by the hour. 7 more federal judges were officially placed under internal review. 3 more staffers came forward under whistleblower protections. The media, always hungry for a new villain, turned their focus to Senator Bradley Vance. The once beloved lawmaker was now the center of a raging storm. And yet he didn't blink. At a press conference on the Capitol steps, Vance stood behind a podium flanked by stone-faced aides and flag pins glinting in the afternoon sun. "These allegations are political theater," he declared, his voice cold, rehearsed. "I have served this country with honor. And I will not be intimidated by vendetta-driven investigations from an attorney general more interested in headlines than justice." Pam watched the footage from her office, arms folded across her chest. "He's doubling down," said Monroe, who stood beside her. "He thinks we're bluffing." "No," Pam said. "He thinks we're afraid to go after someone with real power." She turned back to her desk where a thick manila envelope waited. Inside were financial records pulled from the private server of Genesis Solutions LLC, a fake consulting firm used to move millions through layered shell companies. The money didn't just lead to judges, it led straight to Vance's chief of staff, his former law firm, and an account in the name of Eleanor Vance, the senator's wife. It was the last thread Pam needed. "This," she said, lifting the envelope, "is probable cause." By Friday, a federal grand jury had been quietly convened. Testimony began in secret. The indictment was being drafted. But the syndicate wasn't done yet. That night, a black SUV followed Pam's car as she drove home from DOJ headquarters. When she switched routes, the SUV did too. When she turned into a parking garage downtown, the vehicle vanished only to reappear outside her townhouse 2 hours later. Monroe and the DOJ security chief insisted she relocate to a safe house, but Pam refused. "If they want to silence me, they'll have to do it in the light," she said. But even she couldn't anticipate what happened next. At 3:12 a.m., the DOJ's encrypted data vault, a server housing sealed documents, evidence chains, and active warrants, was breached. Not destroyed, not deleted, cloned. Whoever was behind it had state-level hacking capabilities. It wasn't some rogue group in a basement. This was an inside job. Pam was roused from sleep by a secure line call. She listened to the report in silence, face pale under the low glow of her bedroom lamp. "They're trying to erase the case," Monroe said at the end of the call. "Or worse, leak it and spin it as fake." Pam stood in her kitchen, staring into the darkness outside her window. For the first time since Merrick's arrest, the full weight of what she was fighting began to sink in. This wasn't just about cleaning up a few bad judges or even taking down a corrupt senator. She was facing a machine, a network built on quiet threats, invisible money, and the unshakable belief that some people are untouchable. But Pam Bondi didn't break. She doubled down. Within 24 hours, she ordered a total lockdown of DOJ digital records. No remote access. All evidence backups were transferred to cold storage, offline, hardened systems guarded 24/7. Paper files were moved to a vault inside a classified federal archive known only to her team. Then she went on national television. Seated across from a primetime anchor on Fox News, she laid it all bare. "I don't care who you are, what seat you hold, or what robe you wear," she said live to millions of viewers. "If you sold your power for personal gain, if you betrayed the people's trust, your time is up. We will come for you, not quietly, not politely, but with the full force of the law behind us." The interview went viral instantly. Patriots hailed her as a lioness. Critics accused her of authoritarian overreach. But no one could ignore her anymore. And that was exactly what she wanted. The next morning, as the sun rose over the Potomac, Pam's phone buzzed. A single message from Monroe. "Vance's lawyer just called. He wants to talk." Pam stood at the window of her office, watching the early morning light touch the rooftops of Washington. Behind her, the room was quiet, but not still. Kira Monroe stood by the door, her voice low. "Vance's lawyer's coming in. No statement yet, but he's asking for immunity negotiations." Pam didn't move. She just stared out over the city. "Not yet," she said. "Let him sweat." Across town, Senator Bradley Vance was seated in a private legal suite inside a top-floor D.C. office tower. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. On the table before him were a stack of printed documents, Genesis Solutions shell transactions, evidence of email threads involving judicial appointments, and a still image from a 2019 party in the Hamptons. He was shaking hands with Judge Merrick. His attorney, a polished man with a silver beard and a rattlesnake grin, leaned in. "They've got enough to bury you. But if we move first, get ahead of this, they may offer something." Vance slammed his fist against the table. "I built the city's justice network. I sat on oversight for 12 years. They wouldn't dare, eh?" But he stopped mid-rant. Because deep down he knew they would. Because Pam Bondi already had. By noon, the DOJ's case files, cleaned, indexed, and locked, were ready to present. The Attorney General's team entered the federal courthouse under heavy security, their briefcases carrying enough weight to reshape a branch of the government. What unfolded over the next 48 hours was the kind of judicial theater no one had ever seen. First, Judge Arnett's full confession was made public. Then Merrick's financial crimes, caught on wiretaps and documented through years of forensic tracing, were laid bare for the public. Then came the bombshell: the silent syndicate was real, not just a loose affiliation, but an organized judicial influence network. The syndicate funneled favors, finances, and pressure through key legal and political figures in at least 9 states. And Bradley Vance? His immunity deal was rejected. Pam held a press conference the morning after. Senator Vance was given the opportunity to cooperate fully with this investigation, she said. Instead, he chose silence, denial, and defiance. That time is over. She stepped aside as DOJ agents executed a federal warrant. The cameras rolled as they approached the senator at his Georgetown home, read his rights, and took him into custody in broad daylight. It was the second time in less than a month that America watched a man in power walk out in handcuffs. The response was seismic. Public trust in the judiciary had been rocked, but Pam's swift action restored a measure of faith. Americans across the political spectrum found something rare: agreement. The idea that justice, no matter how delayed, should be blind and absolute. Pam became a symbol not of politics but of reckoning. Some called her the scourge of the syndicate. Others hailed her as a modern-day Elliot Ness. President Trump called her personally. "You just redefined draining the swamp, Pam," he said over the phone. "You didn't clean house. You tore down the dam building." Pam chuckled. "One room at a time, Mr. President." In the weeks that followed, Congress passed emergency legislation tightening oversight on federal judicial appointments. A bipartisan committee was formed to audit the decisions made by any judge linked to the syndicate. For once, both sides of the aisle leaned in because no one wanted to be seen protecting corruption. And Pam? She declined a dozen offers to run for Senate or governor. She had no interest in a book deal, no memoir press tour, no campaign trail spotlight. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, at the helm of justice. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Because she knew the truth. For every corrupt official exposed, for every system burned down and rebuilt, there were more in the shadows. Quiet operators. Power brokers in robes or suits or badges, waiting for the storm to pass. But this time, the storm had a name. Pam Bondi. And she wasn't going anywhere.